come with you. Good evening and welcome. My name is Gary Olson, and I have the honor to serve as Daemen College's 6th president. On behalf of the faculty, the staff, and the students of the college, as well as the Board of Trustees, I would like to thank our guest, Rita Cosby, for being here with us tonight, and all of you for spending time with us. We have an excellent evening ahead, and we're very pleased to get the 2013 Daemen College Academic Festival off to such a strong start. Now, first, I'd like to introduce several of our distinguished trustees. I ask that each stand and remain standing, and please hold your applause until all are standing. Caroline Burke, Chair of the Board. Tom Bridges, Vice Chair of the Board. Dale Demjaniuk, Secretary-Treasurer of the Board. Robert Corr. Peter Hunt. Catherine Carlick. Seymour Knox. Jeffrey Mileman. And Lynn Mullane. So help me thank them. Oh, and I'm sorry, Wayne Wisbaum. Where's Wayne? He gets a special applause. He deserves it. Among the distinguished guests in the audience tonight is Guy Marlette, the Deputy Supervisor of the town of Amherst, right here. And undoubtedly, I left someone out, so I apologize in advance. Before hearing from Rita, I'm delighted to introduce her husband, who is going to sing for us. This is Tomacek Bednarik, who will sing the national anthem. And let me tell you a few things about him. He sings primarily for our troops. And recently, he was at a 9/11 gathering on the USS Missouri. And he also was singing at an opening ceremony for the World Cup in Poland. Boy, he gets around. And listen to this. He's opened for Charlie Daniels, Aaron Tippin, and if you can believe it, Frank Sinatra. Although he was pretty young when that happened. So help me welcome up Tomacek.
Can I ask you all to stand, please? Especially in these days, how great is it that we are Americans? We live in the greatest country in the world. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave? For the land of the free
What a thank you, Tomachek. For more than a decade, the Academic Festival has provided a showcase for Daemen College students and their academic achievement and excellence. The projects are wide-ranging, extending from student and faculty presentations, exhibitions, videos, to posters, panel discussions, and other formats. And these presentations can reflect work done on a single subject or on multiple subjects. And they also include videos as well as artistic, musical, and theatrical performances. That portion of the Academic Festival will take place all day tomorrow, and everyone is welcome to please try to attend this marvelous celebration of academic excellence. Our speaker this evening is a renowned Emmy-winning TV host, veteran correspondent, and best-selling author. Rita Cosby anchored highly rated primetime shows on the Fox News Channel and on NBC. She's currently a special correspondent for the top-rated CBS syndicated newsmagazine Inside Edition. And she hosts her own program, The Rita Cosby Show, on WOR Radio. Rita's talk this evening will reflect on history, both her own and that of her late father. Her recent New York Times bestseller, Quiet Hero, Secrets from My Father's Past, details her fascinating discoveries about her Polish father, a Nazi prisoner of war, who was saved by American troops. Quiet Hero serves as a centerpiece for discussions about the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder on veterans and their families. Throughout her illustrious TV career, Rita has secured interviews with impressive leaders, including exclusive interviews with more than 20 world leaders. She conducted historic back-to-back interviews with Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, the former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. She was granted rare meetings with Pope Benedict XVI and, years earlier, with Pope John Paul II to discuss death penalty issues after she received a personal letter from Timothy McVeigh explaining why he carried out the Oklahoma City bombing. Rita was the first reporter to see prisoners held at Guantanamo Bay and to witness an actual interrogation. While broadcasting live from Belgrade during the NATO bombing in the Bosnian War, she broke the news that 3 American POWs were going to be released. During Hurricane Katrina, she provided extensive live coverage, hosting shows from New Orleans that revealed the widespread devastation that we all now know was there. Soon after that, she reported live from the war zone in Afghanistan and then along the U.S.-Mexico border. Boy, she gets around. Throughout her career, she has also interviewed many celebrities and sports stars. Some of these personalities include, how about this list? Michael Jackson, Mike Tyson, Bruce Willis, Matt Damon, Stevie Wonder, John Bon Jovi, Hank Aaron, and Dennis Rodman. Now, that's a collection for you. Her first book, Blonde Ambition, which is about the untimely death of actress and model Anna Nicole Smith, was a New York Times bestseller and was called the most talked about book in America by Extra. Her second book, Quiet Hero, is enjoying tremendous success, hitting several bestseller lists in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and USA Today. Honors for the 3-time Emmy Award winner include the Matrix Award, the Headliner Award, and the Jack Anderson Award for Journalism Excellence. She was also selected by Cosmopolitan magazine, and this is my personal favorite, as a fun and fearless female. I don't know what you have to do to get that, but obviously she's got it. A recipient of the Ellis Island Medal of Honor and the Lech Walesa Freedom Award, Rita hosts the National Memorial Day Parade broadcast to all U.S. military installations around the world. In recognition of her extraordinary journalism and exemplary service on behalf of the community, and that's, quote, the state of New York named October 11, 2010, Rita Cosby Day. In 2011, she was recognized by Congress for her professional and charitable achievements, and Rita has spoken at the United Nations, Capitol Hill, and the Pentagon. And her critically acclaimed book has become required reading at many U.S. colleges, and apparently here, because I've seen copies everywhere. Please join me now in welcoming Rita Cosby.
So to be a fun and fearless female, actually, Dr. Olson, I loved when I got picked for that too. I thought that was very fun. Isn't that kind of fun of all the things? Dr. Olson, thank you for the very lovely and beautiful introduction. I also want to thank all of you for inviting me here to your wonderful, wonderful school and beautiful campus. I thought up until today that I had the best job in the world, but I have learned that Dr. Olson has the best job in the world because he's in charge and overseeing all of you. What a great place, and walking into paradise every day. This is absolutely incredible. We had the pleasure, we were just at a little reception at his wonderful, wonderful home where you're staying, and you're really blessed. It's just an incredible, incredible place. And everybody here is happy and learning, and I'm so impressed with all the different academics that all of you have. We see a lot of students and maybe people like you, Joe, who were a student maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and a couple of you, but you guys are all in such an amazing position to really take it to the next level and to really have an incredible future. As someone who's been to a lot of colleges and a lot of schools around the country, you are all really blessed, and I think you're going to be leaps and bounds in front of so many others when you get out of school and have so many great job opportunities. Even in this crazy market that we cover in the news every day, I think you're all going to have really exciting careers based on the foundation that you're getting here. Also, because Dr. Olson has the best job in the world, I think we need to trade places. I think that you should do the news show tomorrow and I can stay here. Is that okay? You would look really great in a silk suit. What do you think? With a skirt, and what do you think? He would be a fun and fearless male. What do you think? And we'll name a day in New York after you, too. I also want to thank everybody here. There were some special people who really made it happen, and I want to make sure I thank them, of course. Michael Brogan, where are you? I know you are there front and center. Thank you, Michael, very much. Thank you. Michael Andre, where are you? My former broadcast colleague, is he here in the crowd? There he is in the back. David Cristantello, where are you, David? Thank you, good to see you again, my friend. And also my dear friend, Brian Rusk, who many of you know. He is the unofficial mayor of Buffalo and Amherst. He knows everybody, as you know. Also, I want to thank Entercom Communications. It's been a really crazy last 24 hours, and I'm so happy to be here because it's been so busy, as you can imagine. As a journalist, and I'm an investigative journalist, as you heard so eloquently from Dr. Olson, I do a lot of stories on terrorism, and it's been a really busy last 24 hours. But I told everybody I have to be here in Daemen, so I am so happy to be here tonight. And also, as Tom was saying so eloquently, so happy to be an American. Network news is a really busy job. And the last 24 hours have been just completely frenetic. I've been doing shows. Entercom was kind enough to let me use their studio, so I did my 2-hour live radio show from Entercom just a little bit ago. So I want to thank them, too, for allowing me to do it from here because it's a story that needs to be covered, obviously, what's been happening in Boston. And for me, this is very close to home because my father was a marathon runner. And my whole youth, I remember meeting my dad at the 20-mile mark of Boston Marathon. And I used to run the last 6.2 miles with my dad, or I'd meet him at certain points and give him the Gatorade and, give him a hug and give him a big encouragement. And then also, I was one of those spectators. I was so sad to hear that one of the young children who was killed was an 8-year-old boy, and he was a spectator. I was one of those spectators. at 8 years old, watching my father come in and cheering him as he came in and crossed the finish line. So this story is certainly very close to home, and my thoughts and prayers tonight go with all those families and praying for a speedy recovery for those who are still in the hospital, and I pray that they make it through okay. Sadly, I've covered a lot of terrorist acts. As Dr. Olson was talking about, I received the historic letter from Timothy McVeigh, who carried out the Oklahoma City bombing. And I had tried to get an interview with Timothy McVeigh at the time, everybody was, and he had agreed to do an interview with me. And then Attorney General John Ashcroft, then the Attorney General of the U.S., had canceled it and said, no interviews with this guy, he won't be talking. And I sent in a letter. I had about 60 questions that I wanted to ask him, and I thought, let me see if he answers the questions. And he answered 6. It was really fascinating as we're talking about what's happened in Boston, the mind, to see which ones he chose to answer and which ones he chose not to answer. As you also heard from Dr. Olson, my communications with Timothy McVeigh are what caused me to suddenly get what I tell everybody, one of the most incredible calls in my life. I was in Italy actually having fun. I was one of my rare times off, and I'm in the hotel, and suddenly I get a call from the Vatican. And I got a call from a bishop that I knew there who said, what are you doing on Wednesday? It was a Monday night, and I was supposed to fly back to the United States on Tuesday. And I said, well, why? He said, the Pope would like to see you. And I said, I'm available. I think I'll stay. This is important enough. So I tell everybody, it was a great moment for me to be able to tell my bosses at the time. I was with Fox News at the time and the senior correspondent there in Washington. And it was a great opportunity to call my bosses and say, you know what, I can't come back. I need another day off. The Pope would like to see me. That was a pretty good thing. And the Pope was anti-death penalty, as all popes are, even in the most atrocious cases, which certainly Timothy McVeigh's was. But it was so fascinating for me to be able to see the Pope and to see Pope John Paul as, I'm a Polish American. So to be there, and we have a lot of Poles in the audience too, right? How many Poles do we have in the audience? Will you raise your hands? Yay, we got a lot of you, awesome. So you know what a thrill to be incredible, and I pray he's going to become a saint soon, because what an incredible man. And to look into these ever-knowing blue, crystal blue eyes, and to be able to ask him anything. I tell everybody it was one of the greatest days of my life and one of the greatest gifts of my life. I also have met a lot of interesting people in my life, some other tyrants and some interesting leaders who are making a difference in the Middle East. There's been so much focus on the Middle East of late. I met with King Abdullah of Jordan, who, thank goodness, is a great ally of ours over there. And you probably recognize this guy over here. I was one of the last American journalists to meet with Muammar Gaddafi. Also, I went to Afghanistan, and I spent a lot of time with our troops in Afghanistan. And in fact, some of the new news, I don't know how much you've been watching the news today, but these bombs that went off, the 2 that went off in Boston, they strongly believe, based on the type of bomb that they are, that they may have been made right where basically I'm almost standing. This is right along the Afghan-Pakistan border, and this is where Osama bin Laden, they believe, slipped out early on, many, many years ago. Remember, early on we were looking for him, we thought we had him cornered, and then they believe he escaped through Tora Bora, which is pretty close to where I'm standing right here. And so, it's such an important place in the world, and to see our troops, and I know we've got a lot of wonderful veterans in the audience, I have such appreciation for what the military does, and our U.S. military, and especially being over there in Afghanistan. For me to cover the story, I think it's so important for journalists to go over there and see it firsthand, and to go there and see some of the Americans that I visited. Think about this. They were at forward operating bases. We flew into Bagram. We took a 2-hour chopper. We go to a forward operating base, and some of these guys had not seen another American outside of their unit in more than a year. So when they saw me, I don't think it was, Rita Cosby. They were so happy to see another American. It was like, thank goodness. And they're in the middle of no man's land. Literally, the small unit is protecting thousands of miles. And it's barren, and it's mountainous, and it's just, it's so overwhelming. And I walked away from there just saying, our troops are so incredible and so heroic to be there in such difficult conditions. I've been in a lot of very tough places. Afghanistan is unforgiving. And to be there in the wintertime, it's freezing, it's cold, it's just God bless our great troops for being over there. I also had a funny story because our troops said to me at one of these bases that I was at, one of those remote bases where nobody visits, they're surrounded by a lot of Afghans. And so the American troops came over to me, and they said to me, you know what, don't worry about those guys. I don't understand a thing we're saying. They're just villagers, and they're crazy. Don't worry about it, don't even worry about talking to them. So a couple of these guys were hanging out with me. And then at one point, I'm standing there, and I hear this whisper in my ear. And I'll never forget this moment. In perfect English, and I'm looking forward, and these guys who didn't just look bad, they smelled bad too. I could smell them a mile away. So I came up, and I hear in perfect English, don't say anything. I'm CIA. I'm a huge Fox News fan. I love you. And I'm like, he's like, don't turn around. Nobody knows I'm here, not even the U.S. troops. Isn't that interesting? So it's one of those guys there. I'm not going to tell you which one. But isn't that fascinating? And here they are in the middle of no man's land watching the news, which was very funny. And I hope I put a smile on his face because he definitely put a big smile on my face. During my TV career, and as mentioned, I've been at Fox News, NBC, now I'm at CBS. I have been to so many interesting places. I've met so many fascinating world leaders. I just told you I was in the war zone as a young blonde woman covering Bill Clinton. That was battle. I have some good stories, ladies, which I'll share with you later. I also have met as well. Obviously, Robert De Niro, Will Smith, Mike Tyson. I actually just was talking to Mike Tyson. I just did an interview with him yesterday. As you heard from Dr. Olson, I meet so many different fascinating people. And I interview world leaders. I might be talking to Henry Kissinger at one moment, and then another moment talking to a Mike Tyson. But Mike Tyson is now a vegan, and he doesn't eat meat. And he said he's totally cleaned up his life. I don't know. This will last about a day. But he has lost 160 pounds. And he's doing a one-man tour all over the country, directed by Spike Lee, who was here, I think, a couple years ago. So very funny, just to see what happens. And every time there's some new drama with him, he certainly is very fun. Like Dennis Rodman, we were talking about before. Never a dull moment. Also, you see Michael Jackson. I was one of the few journalists at the end of his life that he felt comfortable talking to. And there were about 3 of us. He was very scared of the media and would always cringe, even if it was a sort of tough question. And I've asked tough questions. Those were like semi-tough, not even real difficult. But it always kind of cringe. But fascinating man and so talented. And yes, ladies, George Clooney is as cute as he looks and charming. So yes, 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 yes. We also take stories to great heights. And this was one of the most fun experiences of my life. I got to jump with the Golden Knights, and the U.S. Army asked me to go down and do some training with them for live fire exercises, and this was always on my bucket list. Have any of you in the room done that? Have any of you done skydiving? Oh, you have. Brave people in the front. Look, love that. Where did you do it? And where did you do it? Fantastic. Isn't it? It's so neat. And I did it near Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I did it with the Golden Knights. And I was a little terrified, but I thought, I got to do this. This is one of my fantasy dreams. And I thought, if I'm ever going to do it with the best in the world. And the Golden Knights are the best. These guys are the professional jumpers. They train all the U.S. military. And the guy I jumped with had 6,900 jumps. So I thought that's either good news, that he has a good track record, or maybe now it's time to break the track record. But in any case, we did a tandem jump. We jumped 13,500 feet. And you go about 120 miles an hour for the first 10,000 feet. And we went through the clouds, and it was like a puff of air. It was like almost somebody splashed you with water. That's how fast we went through the clouds. But it was such a beautiful perspective to see the world from that point. As I mentioned to you, in network news, and the last 24 hours has sort of been no exception, we do tons of traveling. Anybody who knows me, in my briefcase that I have with me now, I have my passport, I have my toothbrush, I have my underwear, a few gag gifts if you know me too. But anyway, you always have to be ready to go. And there's been so many times that I literally have left with the shirt on my back and come back, sometimes weeks later, sometimes months later. And when I first started at Network News, when I took off, I was told I was going on an overnight trip. And I came back 2.5 months later, and I went to almost 100 cities. Think about that. I was following the campaign trail. I was covering hurricanes. I was, every single thing, White House. But it was one of those most incredible times. And I love being able to have a front row seat to people who are really creating history and shaping history. I want to show you all just a little sample in a moment, as Tom's queuing it up. In a moment, I'm going to show you some really fun experiences
From
that I've had. Here it
MSNBC,
is.
the new Rita Cosby Specials Unit, bringing you the big interviews today that everyone will be talking about tomorrow. Host and MSNBC special correspondent Rita Cosby will take you directly to the scenes of the most important stories in the world.
I'm coming to you live from New Orleans, live and direct from Afghanistan in LA. From Yardley, Pennsylvania, I am live and direct from the Falls. I'm coming to you live and direct from Kingston, Tennessee. I'm here live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, from the Durham County Courthouse, coming to you live and direct from Aruba. I'm here in West Virginia in front of the Sago Mine.
Rare interviews with world leaders.
What advice would you give to Karl Rove, who's going through the same thing as you?
Well, depend on your faith. That'll get you through.
What do you say to people who want to cross the border illegally?
But they shouldn't. But they shouldn't.
Should someone have been fired for that? Because clearly bad intelligence was given to people like you and the president. No one's been held accountable.
Oh, I wouldn't hold it that.
Well, no one's been
place.
fired.
If you think about it, we have failures of intelligence all the time. Intelligence has never been perfect. It's
But
never
this was
been.
a big deal. This was going to war.
It was a big deal, and it was the general view of the intelligence services.
It was there that I had my exclusive interview with the man who has now led the Palestinian people for more than 3 decades. You recently closed the offices of the terrorist group Hamas. The world is wondering why you did not do that sooner. In the 15 months of this intifada,
Yes.
there have been many attacks. Why did you have to wait until then to close their offices?
I didn't wait.
I'm going to meet with Ariel Sharon tomorrow. What message would you like to send to him?
And that stare is sort of how he really looked at me like, I don't know what I'm going to say. Arafat was a fascinating man, and I always loved going over to the Middle East and interviewing him. And it's always such a tumultuous time. I also asked him, are you worried about being assassinated by your own people? And he looked at me and he said, the only person who's going to assassinate me, or the only one who's going to end my life, meaning a higher power. So he was a fascinating man, and it was always scary to go over there. I always had to use a passcode and a keyword and had to get switched from car to car and sometimes blindfolded to go over and do the interview wherever his whereabouts were, because they were such a threat against his life and everybody on both sides of the aisle there, as many of you know. And I think also today, as we're going through everything that happened in Boston, especially of the people over there in the Middle East, who are living with bombings every day and day out, how difficult it is, especially for those in Israel. What a terrible, terrible time that they go through every day. You're seeing a picture of Castro because I have a funny story. When I was in Cuba, I got stuck in an elevator with Castro. And it was like, who doesn't fit? It was Castro and like 10 of his henchmen and me. At the same time, when I flew into Cuba, I was with Fox at the time, and when I was going to do the interview, my colleagues and some people who had been over in Cuba, they give very restricted sort of how many of us go over or for what reason. Even as journalists, only at certain times do they allow a lot of folks. But at this time, I was one of the only journalists to go over there. And one of my colleagues who had been there said, if they put you at a certain hotel in a certain room, they are watching you. There are video cameras. So sure enough, I get to Havana, I walk in, all right, it's that hotel. Turning down the hallway, it's that hallway. And I sure enough look and I thought, I gotta see if there's this video camera. So I open it up and sure enough, I open a painting and there it is in the back of a painting is a video camera. And needless to say, I was a little nervous about getting changed in the bathroom. There may be some Kim Kardashian video of me somewhere out there in Cuba to this day. I was trying to get dressed with the lights off and everything else, but who knows? It was a little bit of a creepy feeling, needless to say. I tried to put socks on the cameras that I could find, but I hope I found them all. So if you guys find any videotapes, let me know, okay? The other thing, in that same video, the same trip rather, to Cuba, I walked in one night, and I got in the middle of the night to my room. And think about this happening in the United States. I walked in, and I saw this guy in a beige security outfit, sort of a suit, security for the hotel. As I'm walking into my hotel room, that I've already covered with all the socks and everything else, he's going through my drawers, rummaging through my things. And when I walked in, I said to him in Spanish, I speak fluent Spanish because I did an exchange program in Seville, Spain. I know many of you guys have exchange programs, and I know you just started one recently with Poland, a school in Poland, which I love. Congrats on the NCAA, by the way, Division II. You guys have a lot to cheer about. And so there I am, walking into the room, and I see him going through my things, and I said to him in Spanish, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm going through your stuff." He says to me in Spanish, like, "Leave me alone, I'm working." Basically, like, "Don't bug me, woman, I'm working." And I looked at him, and I said to him, "Favor, please come back tomorrow. I'd like to go to bed. I'm leaving after 10 o'clock. You can have all day. I won't be back till tomorrow night. You can go through the whole room then." And he said, "Okay, thank you very much." So I go out, I go shooting all day long, I come back, and I walk in, and as soon as I walk in to my room, the next night, my room is ransacked. He went through everything in my room, pulling out drawers, seeing if anything was hidden. They were looking for some interviews I had done with dissidents. I'm pretty convinced that's what they were looking for. They did not find it. We had it somewhere else. But so they're looking, going through everything, and I thought, and I see the guy, like 2 days later in the hotel. We're in the elevator together, and I said to him, "How did you like the room?" And he said, "It was very nice, thank you." That was our whole conversation. Such is life in Cuba. My Spanish was also a lifesaver in another story, and this was very early on in my career. I started out, and I didn't start at a network TV. I wish I would have been that lucky, but in television we got to work our way up, and I was in Bakersfield, California. And there I had found out the story of a bail bondsman, who goes and retrieves a drug suspect or any type of suspect, someone who's jumped bond, and he was trying to bring somebody who was in Mexico across the border back to Bakersfield, to that area where I was working at the time. And I had found out the story that there was this bail bondsman in our area who had been in one of the worst prisons in the world for 9 months. Think about this. And when he got to the prison, that had been after he was, beaten, the guy he was with was killed. He went down to talk to Mexican police and thought he was doing the right thing. Here's the law enforcement. He was a former sheriff, by the way, so he wasn't just a bail bondsman with minimal training. He had a lot of training. And he went down thinking, if I go to the Mexican police, they'll help me. 2 law enforcement agencies working together. Certainly not the case. And so what happened was they ended up taking him into custody. They kill the guy with him. They throw him in the trunk of a car for 9 days. No food, no water. And then they throw him in La Mesa Federal Penitentiary, which is right in Tijuana, right on the California-Mexico border. So I find out about this story, and I, through a lot of investigative work, find out that there's a huge trail of graft, money-taking, not just, sadly, on the Mexican side, but on the U.S. side as well. And I had one great asset, and I encourage all you students, especially, you have some wonderful language classes here at the university. And it was my Spanish that really saved me, because they didn't know I spoke Spanish. So they saw Polish, Danish Rita Cosby, and were speaking right in front of me in Spanish, and literally saying, "Hey, we've taken enough money from this family, what should we do?" And right in front of me said, "What should we do with this reporter?" Think of your face. You're sitting there in front of these U.S. officials. I'm in Mexico, a foreign country, and I'm trying to pretend like I don't understand a word they say. And I'm waiting for them to say, should we kill her? You know, that was sort of the next sentence I thought I was going to hear out of their mouth. And then I heard them say, well, hopefully she won't really realize what's going on and blah, blah, blah. And what they didn't know was I was wired. And I had a hidden microphone. So not only did I hear it, but a lot of other people did too later. We hid our vehicle. I was with a station called Channel 23 News, KERO in Bakersfield at the time. And we had these big news vans, like the ones that you see around town that say, you know, the stations here in Buffalo, Buffalo News. Well, there it said KERO all over the van, and I thought, oh my goodness. And I thought maybe my face is showing that I understand them, and they're wondering what's going on, or they're going to do something to me regardless and make sure I don't cross the border. And I had already interviewed him at the prison. So I already had, when the guards had walked away, I had 5 minutes to do the interview. Because when they were there, he was just talking, oh, the prison's wonderful, the prison's wonderful. And I heard him say in Spanish, we're going to go for a smoke break. So as soon as they went out for a smoke break, I ended up doing the real interview with him, which was about 5 minutes, where he talked about what was really happening to him in that Mexican prison. And you can imagine what was happening to him and just how horrible and difficult it was. And he was with about 24 other Americans, many of them there for no reason at all like him. And just lost in the process and, nobody really helping, no one knowing what to do. Here you're dealing with another country who's our neighbor, and at that time, ultimate corruption. And so we're thinking, how are we going to get out of the country? I wanted to run the interview with him, of course, and bring his story to light, expose all the corruption. So we hid our van behind a store, and we're taping up our van with cardboard because we didn't want them, we figured if they said at the border, stop the 23 News van, maybe if we could cover up the 23, they won't know what it is, and they'll just think it's, a grocery truck or something, or somebody with fruit. So we bought little scarves. I tried to sort of look a little different. My camera guy too. We put cardboard and tape all around over the Channel 23 News, and we crossed the border into America. And I said, whew. And then my next thought was, I'm going to run this story soon with this guy and this amazing man who had been going through unconscionable conditions. Right before I was about to go to air, and I'll never forget this call, I get a call from him. And I said to him, when I go back, before I run the story, as a journalist, we have to show both sides of the story. And I'm going to have to tell them that I'm running a story exposing graft and exposing what we have and showing it. And they're not going to be happy. And he said, no, I know. You have to run the story. It's important. So right before I go to air, I have an 8-minute piece exposing everything. I get a call from this man, Tony Choquette, and he calls me and said, Rita, I'm being taken out of the prison right now, and they're going to shove me in a dark van. And of course, my first thought was, they're going to kill him. And he said to me, Rita, I know what you're thinking. Run the story. You have to run the story. If I never talk to you again, I want you to run that story for the other Americans who are held unlawfully in there. You have to blow the lid off this. You have to promise me you will run the story no matter what happens to me. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my goodness, what a responsibility to have. So we ran the story. And as I was on live, I remember thinking to myself, the only way I can save this man, I knew they'd be watching the story because they knew well about it, was to say something at the end of the story. So I said live on the news set, I said, and as we speak, he's being hauled out of the prison, and whatever you are planning to do, we will follow you. We will find out what happened to Tony Choquette. And if something happens to him, you will not only have graft charges on your hands, you will have murder charges. This story is not done. We are following him, and we want him back home. And one of the greatest calls in my life was maybe about 15 to 20 minutes later. I got a call from Tony Choquette, and he said, I'm on the U.S. side of the border, and someone threw me out of a van, but I'm in America, and I am free. He and I have stayed in touch. I just talked to him a few months ago, and he has thanked me for saving his life. To me, I feel like that's what great journalism really is all about and doing something that really makes a difference. And I think of that story very, very often. For me also, I've been talking about other stories, but probably the most deeply personal story to me is one involving my own father. You heard Dr. Olson about it. You know, when I was growing up, I knew my dad was different, and I remembered when I was 8 years old, my dad came back from a run. This was not at the Boston Marathon, but this is when I was camping at the time, and I was with my mother and my brother, and we were out camping. And I remember him taking his shirt off, because it was a long run and sweating, and seeing all these scars all over his body. And I remember asking my mother, what happened to Dad? I knew as a child that that body didn't look normal. It looked like cracks and dried mud. And my mother said to me, clear as day, your dad went through tough times growing up. We don't talk about it. And the door was closed. And so fast forward, my mother raised us, and sadly my mother passed away from cancer. And after she passed away, my brother and I put all our stuff in a storage locker. And then just about 4 or 5 years ago, this is a very new journey, my brother and I went through those belongings. And inside we saw this old suitcase, and inside the suitcase was essentially my father's life. The father who I really didn't know, because my father had left the family when I was a teenager abruptly. And so suddenly I was going through all these items, and I saw this rusty POW tag emblazoned with the word Stalag 4B, and I saw this red and white fighting Polish armband, and then I saw this card of someone fighting in the AK, the Home Army. And then I saw a card of an ex-POW named Ryszard Kozabutsky. And at that moment, I just wept, because I realized whatever pain I had not having a father in my years after my teenage years, and the loss of that and the pain of not having your father around was nothing compared to someone who was a Nazi prisoner of war. I tracked down my dad. Luckily, he was alive and well in Alexandria, Virginia. He was very happy to hear from me, and he shared his story. And I'll just tell you very briefly about it. My dad was 13 years old when the Nazis invaded, and he joined the Eaglets in Warsaw, Poland. My dad then became a full-blown fighter at the age of 15. He lied and said he was 16 so he could pick up arms against the Nazis. And my dad is not Jewish, but he tried to help those inside the ghetto and those outside the ghetto. And what's amazing about my dad's story is the battle that the Polish resistance, I know there's a number of Poles here in the audience, and our heritage is so incredible and so heroic. In my father's unit, 150 guys, there were only 3 guns. Think about the odds, and you're fighting the most vicious war machine in the world. The Nazis had every single, form of firepower, and the Polish resistance had nothing. And these young men and women were charging. And I just think it's incredible, the sheer guts and just the pride in their country and devotion to Poland and willing to die for their country, as my father was. 90% of my father's unit died. Think about the odds. 10%, the lucky ones survived. My dad escaped at one part, and in fact, luckily survived by escaping through the sewers of Warsaw. And can you imagine how dark and scary that is? How many of you guys have been to where the statue is of those going into the sewers? Have you been in Old Town? My dad's, where he actually escaped, is about 10 yards away from that very famous statue that's there today. And if you look, it's a very small little manhole cover. And I went there with my dad, and I said, Dad, how did you get through that? And he said, I was a little skinnier then. We didn't eat a lot. We were able to go through there pretty quickly. But my father's story is really, I think, the story of Poland, and I think it's such a heroic story, and we have so much to be proud of. My father was seriously injured, thrown at the butt of a gun, thrown onto a boxcar, and then hauled here to Stalag 4B in Mollberg, Germany, about an hour from Dresden. It's one of the biggest POW camps in World War II, and there were a lot of different nationalities. It's a huge camp. Look how many men. I mean, there have been estimates that it was anywhere from 30 to 40,000 people in that camp. I mean, huge. and many people were dying from starvation and disease. And my father sold the suit on his back for a loaf of bread so he could have enough energy to escape, and he shared it with other inmates. My father was 90 pounds and 6 feet tall. Think about that, 90 pounds and 6 feet tall, and one of the more healthy ones when he escaped from these barracks and out into the woods. And my favorite part of my dad's story is he was in the woods for 2.5 days. Here he's 90 pounds, he's with 60 other Polish POWs, and they see a plane come by. And at first they think, okay, this is it. We're in Germany, it's a German plane, it's the end of the battle, this is the end of the line. We're discovered and it's done. And the plane comes by again, and they dive for the ditches. And then they see something come out, and they think, oh gosh, it's a grenade, we gotta dive again. And then all of a sudden they look up, and they see a star. And they realize what was on the plane was an American star. And they discovered what was dropped out of the plane by the pilot was not a grenade, but it was a chocolate bar with a note wrapped around it, tied with a red ribbon. And the note said, "Welcome. It's safe to walk now during daytime. There are no troops between you and our American lines. You have 15 miles to walk, and you're free." So I always think about what that must have been like for my dad. You know, here he was 90 pounds, and he said he and his buddies were just hugging and dancing, and they came to this riverbed and saw these young American GIs. My dad was 18, and the GIs were right around the same age, and he couldn't even speak any English. All he could say was, "Thank you." And they kept telling him, "You're free, you're free." And that's why my dad wanted to come to America, because he wanted to come here to give back. And I want to share a beautiful story that has very much to do with this area. While my dad was dying of thirst in the middle of all the battle, he was hallucinating at one point about this book that he read when he was a child. And it's so funny, you see these books, these travel books, and they end up in countries thousands of miles away. And this is one of those great stories where my dad, as a very young child, remembers seeing this book of Niagara Falls, right near here. How many of you are from Niagara Falls in this room? Okay, we got a couple, good. And so my dad, in the height of the uprising, where they're dying, the Nazis cut off water, they cut off electricity, they cut off schools, they cut off churches, and so there was nothing to drink. They were dousing themselves in perfume. I remember him telling me he had a perfume factory one day, and just eating whatever they could, finding drink wherever they could. And one day he was dying of thirst, and it was a hot summer day in the middle of the uprising. And he said he started hallucinating, and all he could think about to kind of keep him satiated was the waterfalls from Niagara Falls in this book that he had seen, many years earlier. So wouldn't you know it, when my dad came to this area, he decided to work at the Niagara Falls power plant as a civil engineer. And I love that story of how these books and they end up in these visions. So my dad came here to this area. So this is very much a homecoming for the Cosby family. He also lived in Buffalo, he also lived in Clarence, and also in Grand Isle. So for me, it's really special to be here tonight. Also, before we go, and I want to end on a funny note, but before we do, I just want to acknowledge we have Keen Stim, who is here. I believe I saw you from the Battle of the Bulge. Keen, thank you very much. Survived the Battle of the Bulge. In my dad's camp, some of the guys who were taken captive were taken to my dad's camp. So my dad got to, in fact, one of my favorite stories of my dad, and I just think how touching this is. My dad, when he was in the camp, saw the Americans come in, and you have no perspective of the war, of what's going on. You're in the POW camp, you're getting limited information. And my dad saw the guys who came in from the Battle of the Bulge, and some of those guys, who were taken captive, you hear the stories that they were forced to sleep outside in the winter for weeks, and they looked terrible. And so think about this gesture, especially Keen, you'll appreciate this. When my dad saw those guys coming into his camp at Stalag 4B, my dad and his guys saved up their food for a few days, the little they had, and sent it over to the American barracks and said, "Thank you for trying to save us." Of course, the Americans paid them back in spade much later, but you think about how bad it must have been for a POW to save his food and give it to you. I also want to say kudos to your dad, Gary, who was in 3rd Army, right? How fantastic. And also, would all of you who in the room who are veterans, and also my Polish resistance buddies, would all of you guys please stand so we can give you all a huge round of applause? Would all the veterans please stand and Polish resistance guys? Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for your service. I'm going to end on a note that most people would never normally end on. I'm going to tell you all my most embarrassing moment that I've ever had, and I did it on television, so this is very funny. When I first started in television, as I told you, I was working in Bakersfield, California, and we would go on set, and we would go to a variety of places. But when we would go on set, my colleague and I, we would tell each other funny jokes and sort of dirty jokes and different stories. And by the way, this is my father with President Kaczynski right here. He got a hero's welcome when he went back to Poland. So what an incredible, amazing day. And my dad and I reunited as a result of this book. And also my brother and I, both reunited with my father. So it was an incredible, incredible journey. But when I was in Bakersfield, we used to tell each other sort of dirty jokes and funny stories, my co-anchor and I, before we'd go on set. And one day, my co-anchor, who's a male co-anchor, said some funny story, and I said, okay, well, the next day I got to one-up him and have a better joke, and I'll make it a little dirty, but not too dirty, but just a little dirty. So right before the newscast the next day, I'm sitting there on set. Guy knows where this is going. He can see it. So we're sitting there on set, and my co-anchor tells me a little joke, and then we go to break, and my producer said to me, okay, microphones are off. You have a 5-minute break. So I had a really funny, sort of risque joke. Not too bad, but a little risque, a little off color. And so we go to commercial break. I told my joke. It was very funny. All of us in the studio all laughed. We all thought it was great. My co-anchor laughed and thought it was hysterical as well. And about 2 minutes later, my producer said, okay, microphones are back on, no problem. And I continued the newscast. I thought we all did a great job. I finished the show, and then I go back to the newsroom. And I go back to the newsroom, and phones are ringing off the hook. And I thought, okay, I guess we did a good job today, That's wonderful to get this kind of feedback. And I pick up the first call, and it turns out to be this sort of dirty old man. And he said to me, are you going to be doing those dirty jokes every day? Because they're really funny. And I thought, oh my goodness, I have just told a dirty joke on the air over a commercial, obviously not intended, but oh my goodness. So here I was very early on in my career, and I thought, okay, one of two things is going to happen. I'm either going to get fired, or I'll find out if my boss had a really good sense of humor. Luckily, my boss found out that it was an accident, and it was run over a car commercial. And the car dealer said, this is so great. He did all these ads about it. He said, the one where Rita Cosby did the dirty jokes. It was the big story. And at least everybody in town knew I had a very good sense of humor. So everybody was saying, are you going to do that again tomorrow? What's the dirty joke? But anyway, I just want to close by saying thank you to all of you. I'm very blessed to do what I love, and I hope by sharing my story gives you an appreciation of some of the incredible people that I have met. Because as a journalist, I am so lucky to get a front row seat, but we're just often covering the story. Sometimes we make the news. Sometimes we're able to do some incredible things. I was so proud of what happened with Tony Choquette, the man who was held in the prison in Mexico. But also, I feel so blessed to have met so many amazing people who really are shaping history. And also along the way I've learned, and I learned this in Bakersfield, you have to have a really good sense of humor, because every day is never the same. It's always new, it's always interesting, but it is definitely never dull. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Charles.
I would say fearless and fun is in order,